When Bob asked me to come out here, I said I wouldn't have time to prepare a speech, but I largely underestimated the travel time between Kentucky and Spokane. The speech is not filled out. It sort of gives the structure of my thinking about the problems that I've observed in agriculture. I was asked to talk about labor-intensive microsystems agriculture. That's not my language, and it's not the sort of language that I wish to use, because it's the way people speak when they don't want to be understood by most people. I'm not sure what to make of these particular phrases, but they seem to me to suggest merely a methodological or technological approach to agriculture. And part of my approach, or part of my purpose here, is to suggest that any such approach will necessarily be too simple. I should perhaps say something about my qualifications. I'm not a farm expert, and I wasn't educated in an agriculture college. I do come from a farm community where my people have farmed for 5 or 6 generations before me, and where I farm. And I inherit from my father and others concern for what happens to farmers. And I won't speak mainly out of my experience. In my boyhood, Henry County, Kentucky was not just a rural county, as it still is. It was almost entirely a farming county. The farms were generally small. They were farmed by families who lived not only upon them, but within and from them. They grew gardens. They produced their own meat, milk, and eggs. They were highly diversified. The main money crop was tobacco, but the farmers also grew corn, wheat. I feel like I'm talking in a barrel. Do I need to move this thing back or something? No, that's a paradoxical remedy. But the farmers also grew corn, wheat, barley, and oats, sorghum and hay for forage. Cattle, hogs, and sheep were all characteristically raised in association on the same farms. There were many small dairies, the milking more often than not done by hand. Those were the farm products that might have been considered major. But there were also minor products, and one of the most important characteristics of that old economy was the existence of markets for those minor products. In those days, a farm family could easily market its surplus of cream, eggs, old hens, and frying chickens. The major motive power for field work was still furnished by horses and mules. There was still a prevalent pride in workmanship, and thrift was still a social ideal. The pride of most people was still in their homes, and their homes looked like it. This was by no means a perfect society. Its people had often been violent and wasteful in their use of the land and of each other. Its present ills had already taken root in it. But I have spoken of its agricultural economy of a generation ago to suggest that there were also good qualities indigenous to it that might have been cultivated and built upon. That they were not cultivated and built upon, that they were repudiated as the stuff of a hopelessly outmoded, unscientific way of life, is a tragic error on the part of the people themselves. And it is a work of monstrous ignorance and irresponsibility on the part of the experts and politicians who have prescribed, encouraged, and applauded the disintegration of such farming communities all over this country into our allegedly miraculous modern American agriculture. In the decades since World War II, the farms of Henry County have become increasingly mechanized. Though they are still comparatively diversified, they are less diversified than they used to be. The holdings are larger, the owners are fewer. The land is falling more and more into the hands of speculators and professional people from the cities, who, in spite of all the scientific agricultural miracles, still have much more money than farmers. There are not nearly enough people on the farms to maintain them properly, and they are for the most part visibly deteriorating. The number of part-time farmers and ex-farmers increases every year. Our harvests depend more and more upon the labor of old men and little boys. The farm people live less and less upon their own produce, more and more from the grocery stores. The best of them are more worried about money and more overworked than ever before. Among the people as a whole, the focus of interest has largely shifted from the household to the automobile. The ideals of workmanship and thrift have been replaced by the goals of leisure, comfort, and entertainment. For, as my friend Maurice Tellene says, this nation has created the world's first broad-based hedonism. And nowhere that I know is there a market for a hen or a bucket of cream or a few dozen eggs. Those markets were done away with in the name, I believe, of sanitation, but to the enormous enrichment of the large producers. Future historians will no doubt remark upon the inevitable association with us between sanitation and filthy lucre. It is, of course, one of the miracles of science that the germs that used to be in our food have been replaced by poison. In all this, few people whose testimony would have mattered have seen the connection between the modernization of agricultural techniques and the disintegration of the culture and the communities of farming. What we have called agricultural progress has in fact involved the forcible displacement of millions of people. I remember during the 50s the outrage with which certain of our leaders spoke of the forced removal of the populations of villages in communist countries. I also remember that at the same time in Washington, the word on farming was get big or get out, a policy that is still in effect. The only difference here is in method. The force used by the communists was military. With us, it has been economic, a free market in which the freest were the richest. The attitudes were equally cruel, and I believe that in the long run the results will be equally damaging, not just to the concerns and values of the human spirit, but to the practical possibilities of survival. And so those who could not get big have got out, not just in my community, but in farm communities all over the country. Bigness, however, is a most amorphous and unstable category. As a social or economic goal, it is totalitarian. It establishes an inevitable tendency toward the tyrannical one that will be the biggest of all. Many who got big to stay in are now being driven out by those who are still bigger. The aim of bigness implies not one social or cultural aim that is not noxious. Its influence on us may already have been disastrous, and we have not yet seen the worst. And this community-killing agriculture, with its monomania of bigness, is not primarily the work of farmers, though it has burgeoned upon their weaknesses. It is the work of the institutions of agriculture, the experts and the agribusinessmen who have promoted so-called efficiency at the expense of community, and quality and quantity at the expense of quality. Last year in Kentucky, 1,000 dairies went out of business, and that was recognized as an acceleration of a long-established trend. They were the victims of policies by which we imported dairy products to compete with our own and exported so much grain as to cause a drastic rise in the price of feed. Typically, an agricultural expert from the University of Kentucky, my colleague, was willing to applaud the failure of 1,000 dairymen, whose cause he is supposedly being paid with their money to serve. They were inefficient producers, he concluded, who needed to be eliminated. He did not say, indeed there was no indication that he had even considered, what might be the limits of his criterion or his logic. Does he propose to applaud this same process year after year until biggest and most efficient becomes synonymous with only? This sort of brainlessness is invariably justified by pointing to the enormous productivity of American agriculture. But any abundance in any amount is illusory if it does not safeguard its producers. And in American agriculture, abundance has always tended to destroy its producers. Along with the rest of society, the established agriculture has shifted its emphasis and even its interest from quality to quantity. And along with the rest of the society, it has failed to see that in the long run, quantity is inseparable from quality. To pursue quantity alone is to destroy those disciplines in the producers that are the only assurance of quantity. The preserver of abundance is excellence. What are the results of such thinking? The results are the drastic decline in farm population and in political strength, the growth of a vast, uprooted, dependent, and unhappy urban population, which, by the way, is abjectly dependent as it is on the farmer, consistently votes against him. Our rural and urban problems have largely caused each other. The result is an unimaginable waste of land, of energy, of fertility, and of human beings. The result is that the life of the land, which in its native processes is infinite, has been made totally dependent upon the finite, scarce, and expensive materials and products of industry. The result is the disuse of so-called marginal lands, potentially productive, but dependent upon intensive human care and long-term human familiarity and affection. The result is the virtual destruction of the farm culture, without which farming in any but the exploitive or extractive sense is impossible. My point is that food is a cultural, not a technological product. That is, I'm saying that culture is a larger category than technology and includes technology. A culture is not a collection of relics or ornaments, but a practical necessity, and its destruction invokes calamity. A healthy culture is a communal order of memory, insight, value, and aspiration. It would reveal the human necessities and the human limits. It would clarify our inescapable bonds to the earth and to each other. It would assure that the necessary restraints be observed, that the necessary work be done, and that it be done well. A healthy farm culture can only be based upon familiarity. It can only grow among a people soundly established upon the land. It would nourish and protect the human intelligence of the land that no amount of technology can satisfactorily replace. The growth of such a culture was once a strong possibility in the farm communities of this country. We now have only the sad remnants of that possibility, as we now have only the sad remnants of those communities. If we allow another generation to pass without doing what is necessary to enhance and embolden that possibility, we will lose it altogether. And then we will not only invoke calamity, we will deserve it. Several years ago, I argued with a friend of mine that we might make money by going ahead and marketing some inferior lambs. My friend thought about this for a minute, and then he said, "I'm in the business of producing good lambs, and I'm not going to sell any other kind." He also said that he kept the weeds out of his crops for the same reason that he washed his face. Surely no one would question that the human race has survived by that attitude. It still survives by that attitude, though now it can hardly be said to know it, much less acknowledge it. But this attitude does not come from technique or technology. It does not come from education. In more than 2 decades in universities, I have rarely seen it. It does not come even from principle. It comes from a passion that is culturally prepared, a passion for excellence and order that is characteristically, that may be exclusively handed down to young people by older people whom they respect and love. When we destroy the possibility of that succession, we will have gone far toward destroying ourselves.
Get your name and affiliation right across. Sure.
Okay, we'd like to throw it open now for about 15 or 20 minutes for questions and interactions and statements from the audience. Who'd like to have the first whack at whom?
Yeah, I want to ask Herb, is your perspective in terms of the needs of combating world famine inconsistent with the methodology that Wendell has suggested?
I don't think so. And I guess one of the points I was trying to make is that no one simple answer is going to solve this whole total complex problem. But I did try to make clear myself that without the concern for the people that you're expecting to produce this food, even an attitude towards those people in this country or in any area in the world, you're not going to get the food production done. So we are talking about social systems as well as we are about technological advancement in agriculture. My concern is not only that it won't even solve if we solve the production problems unless we have man is rational enough to develop social systems of distribution or sharing of some form to make it possible for people to consume this food. So I'm not trying to set forth all the pat answers for it. I'm trying to say there is a very, very serious problem that we're just beginning to come to grips with. Many of us who've been concerned about the deterioration of the family farm agricultural system in this country for many, many years were not very lucky in getting urban ears to listen to the problems that we're developing. It's only when the prices started going up in the grocery stores and possibly alarm urban people that they suddenly started asking questions about it. And I think it's a healthy awakening that people are concerned about it, but your concern has to go deeper than just my bill is too high in a grocery store. I think you really got to look at the whole chain of events that winds up in making the food availability to the world.
I agree with Mr. Waters. There's no fundamental, there's no contradiction, fundamental or otherwise, between his aims and mine, or need not be. I'm saying that there's not only the plow, there's the head of the man who runs the plow. The nut on the handle, is some people say, it's a question of what the framework of the intelligence is. If it's the machine, then damage happens. If it's the place that the machine is being used on, then there's the possibility of a disciplined and controlled and benign use. I went to Farm Machinery Show at Louisville several years ago and noticed that one of the plows on display was called a sod blaster. We've been blasting sod in this country for generations now. And that's the mentality that's machine-oriented. It's the mentality that plows out the waterways because it's easier to do that than to raise the plow. I was traveling in Iowa and Pennsylvania this spring, and I was alarmed at the way that the Secretary of Agriculture's plea for more production had been obeyed. Lands that ought to have been left in permanent pasture have been plowed, and they've plowed straight across the waterways. The dirt of the fields is out in the road. You can't separate that loss from the mentality that produced it, is what I'm saying. I also met the most prosperous family farmer I ever ran into, who owned 175 acres of not the best Iowa farmland. 50 acres of it he had in permanent pasture. I asked him what he thought of the Secretary's plea for more production. He said he thought that smart farmers always found out what the Department of Agriculture wanted them to do and then didn't do it. He was one that they told to get big or get out. He took his wife to Spain last year on a holiday. That's on 175 acres. And he when I asked him about his methods, he justified them because he said that the other methods polluted our rivers and streams. I had a great impulse to hug him.
I heard one kind of key dichotomy between the what I heard both of you saying this morning. On the one hand, I think we were talking about some sort of a worldwide, and I'm going to use one of those technological terms, macronetwork, which was highly dependent on centralized systems and worldwide distribution of foods. And on the other hand, I heard you talking about smaller systems, more direct community systems, and there seems to be a contradiction between those two. And now I've just heard you both saying that you don't see your approaches as being in contradiction.
I think worldwide joint concern for a problem and worldwide approachment to a problem does not necessarily mean you're going to do worldwide management of the production of the world. There's no question in many areas of the world the incentive to the individual producer is going to have to be really the answer of getting production moved forward. Even within the Eastern European world, the breakdown in part of the communist food production was there was not the individual incentive to the man on the land to produce, and they found it themselves, unless they gave some individual incentive built into this thing, they were not going to get the land cared for properly, they were not going to get the production they needed, and they had to turn to this incentive type approach. I'm not for necessarily big mass production. I see the problem. We put too much of our eggs in a basket in, for example, in India. We took the new varieties, the research we took in there, and we've made some great gains, but it was all predicated upon higher inputs, more use of energy and fertilizer, and suddenly we're confronted with a new problem because we don't have the energy and fertilizer. So we're having to back up and take another look in India as well as elsewhere. Given time, we will make better use of our various forms of energy resources of the world, and we will find some alternative ways of getting increased production in India. But we have to cover this time span somewhere. That's why I say that I think we're going to have to share more of the food from the most efficient producing countries like the United States until we can improve production to a greater degree in the developing world itself.
Yeah.
Make a comment on Mr. Berry's talk. I agree with what he says, deploring the disappearance of the family farm, but I don't have an answer to the problem. But I wonder, does he advocate a forced return to the family farm? And I really fail to see how this would solve the immediate problem. Now, with the gentleman here, as I understood, spoke well of the farmer that uses the hoe, the wooden hoe. Well, the farmer that uses the hoe, I suppose, feeds about one individual per farmer. The farmers in Indonesia and the Philippines, one farmer feeds about 4 people. In Japan, which we think is a fairly highly developed country, very excellent farmers, one farmer feeds about 10 people. Well, in the United States, with today's agriculture, one farmer feeds in the vicinity of 50 people. I think this is isn't this what we're attempting to do to solve the immediate problem? Feed more people with our farming technology? Or is there another solution? If there is, of course, I'd like to hear it.
The goal is to feed more people, not necessarily with fewer people. There's an old adage that Mr. Waters has already quoted about putting all your eggs in one basket. If I was one of the 50 people being fed by only one farmer, I'd be more worried than if there were 4 or 5 at least, or 10. Suppose he dies. When you go, I believe 2.5% of the population now is feeding all the rest. I have no head for statistics. Some of these other gentlemen may have a better figure, but it's very small. And as far as I can see, there's nobody worrying about where the cutoff point is, at which there's always a bottom half. And we're always concerned to eliminate the bottom half because we say they're inefficient. I think our doctrine of efficiency is suspect anyway because it applies only to major quantities. We waste stuff at our place all the time because we can't sell it. It's too little to sell. Beneath notice. You can't give it away unless you cook it for somebody. At what point, how small do you let the percentage of farmers get before you're in danger? We have no alternative energy source on the farm now. When one farmer is feeding 50 people, he's absolutely dependent on petroleum. When the economy shifts to reflect the realities of energy, it may be too expensive to produce some of this food. Certainly at current prices. There's an economist at the University of California, Chico, I believe.
Forget him.
Mr. Perelman, you don't believe in him?
Well, he doesn't know much about what he's talking about, but there are others you can think of.
Well, are his figures wrong on the amount of energy it takes to produce, petroleum energy it takes to produce hybrid corn?
If you're speaking of Perlman or Pimentel, Cornell is pretty much on the beam.
Perelman.
Well, his energy figures are right, but what he wants to do is, as I will explain later this morning, is quite impossible.
Well, I'm not interested in what he wants to do. I'm just interested in his figures, and if they're okay, I'll quote him. He says it takes 5 calories of fossil fuel energy to produce 1 calorie of hybrid corn energy.
Yeah, I know that. Am I supposed to keep still?
No.
Yeah.
I've been quoting Perelman all over. I'm glad.
Well, look, the kinds of jams that people get into all the time, and Perlman is a star performer in that respect, where are you going to draw the line? Now, we have only 3% of the people on the farm. They're not producing all the food for the U.S. The guys that are making the petroleum and the tractors and the spare parts and the transport, that's all part of the agricultural scene. We haven't gone nearly as far down on the labor market that produces food, you think. Now, on the energy question, if you come and eat, 30% of your food at the restaurant, build the restaurant, provide the air conditioning, put gas in the waitress's car, build her automobile, and all the trucks that brought the food. Now you're trading roughly 12 calories of non-farm energy stuff for the one you consume. Now they call that agricultural energy. The reality of the general scene, however, is quite the other direction. You invest 1 calorie, you get about 3 back.
Now, how's that work?
That's at the farm gate. Now, it depends where you want to draw the line. Now, if we go to the primitive agriculture, you grow it hand to mouth. You killed all the transportation, you see, and food processing. And so you get a good energy figure. So what you have to do is elect your system that you're going to use, but the energy tag that goes with the system. Now, if we all go home on the farm and stay there, then we can get by with less. We don't have to be running trucks back and forth, you see. California wine sold in New York wine sold in California. We really run up some fantastic energy bills there.
But don't we have to have that as an aim?
I don't know, but I object to people saying that's what's costing us to farm these days. That's what it's costing us to eat where we eat our food and the way we eat it.
Well, what does it cost us?
About the 12 to 1.
Well, then isn't that a recipe for energy bankruptcy?
Yeah, the Arabs are fixing that. They're pointing out the way now for us.
Right.
It's telling you.
Family in Tennessee, and they farmed the soil instead of mining it. The last symposium we had here, Dr. Donald Gordon told of a truck farm he had seen in California, where they put 2,500 pounds of nitrogen into the soil per acre a year. They rototilled the soil 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. The soil was completely and thoroughly devoid of any qualities whatever. It was only the vehicle that permitted the chemicals to grow the product. I wonder what the possibilities are of reversing the trend from single-family farms to that agribusiness that has no concern whatever about the future of the soils.
Well, I think there's some things that can be done. There's plenty of land and agricultural potential now in the hands of people who are playing tax games with it. That ought to be stopped. And it can be stopped. You can have tax breaks for ordinary people, and they ought to be given some. I don't know about other sections of the country, but in my section of the country, people are working themselves to death on farms. They're carrying big, and I'll tell you, some of these overcapitalized hill farms in my part of the country are going to turn out to damage the soil more than any agriculture that's ever existed. You get $200,000 or $300,000 in debt on 400 or 500 acres of steep land. Put it all in Holstein cows, great big heavy beasts that all congregate and walk the same paths twice a day to be milked, and they're tramping it off into the hollers, and people are busting on those places too. Their lives beforehand and their whole way of life sooner or later. And the experts keep coming around and telling them to get bigger. Butts is now saying that the idea of individual ownership of land is passé. What you want to do is to pay interest on it all your life. Never get free. It seems to me that what we're really talking about is what ought to be our concept of the human business in this world and what our appropriate dignity is. A great deal of the trouble that we're talking about is based on our assumption that we're totally in charge of the universe and that we're too good to work, that fundamental work is beneath our dignity. My own experience tells me that hard manual labor is not demeaning. I've done a lot of it. I have 50 acres that are extremely difficult to farm or are in an extreme state of neglect and abuse because of my predecessors. I do a great deal of hard physical labor, and I don't feel that I've been demeaned by it. I feel that I've been enlivened by it. And I think if we could get over this effort to search out something else that'll spare us a few ounces of sweat, we'll be better off. The fact about sweat is that once it flows, you don't mind it so much anymore. It's the dread of it before you ever break it that causes the trouble. Now, it's certainly true that there are risks in the human adventure, and that it's been up to human beings to take the risks. The discrimination I'd like to make is that we don't have a right to take them for each other. And I'm very much upset by people's willingness to take risks and to risk other people to technological innovations in my behalf. I don't like the government to do it. I don't like scientists to do it. Also, I'd like to say that the thrust of technological innovation has always, in my lifetime, and I think for a good while before, been in the direction of glamour and power. What we really want to do is climb up on some big machine, some bigger machine than we've ever climbed up on before, to show that we've got balls, and to drive out into the land and do some kind of significant and conspicuous damage to it. I don't think it'll do. I don't think it'll do, not because it's immoral, but because I don't think that the world can put up with it very much longer. Technological powers that we have supposedly outmoded are still to some extent useful. The fact that we have a plow called a sod blaster doesn't mean that a hoe is a useless instrument. It doesn't mean that the discipline that it takes to use a hoe is a useless discipline. If a man can use a hoe very well, there's a better chance that he'll use a sod blaster much better. And what I wish to speak for here is the discipline in the human character that makes him able to forbear and restrain himself when he's doing obvious damage to other people. It doesn't make any difference whether farming is using more than its share of fuel or not. We don't know what its share of fuel is. My own impression is we're probably using more fuel for recreation right now than we are for farming. The point is that we're using it up. It's a limited quantity. And we better be thinking about what we're going to do when it's gone. One of the possibilities is that we may be able to resurrect some of the technology that we inherit, and that we'd be wrong to keep running headlong in the direction of more and more risky technologies that we're going to invent and that we don't know the consequences of any more than we've known ahead of time the consequences of the technology that we've already got. That's my reaction to it.
Would you say that it's possible for technology, and we could say science and technology perhaps, to provide tools that can be used in an agriculture process that aren't harmful to the planet, that are more in tune with nature, or like is there some point between the whole and the nuclear reactor?
Of course.
Okay.
There's such a thing as a better whole. There's always the possibility of a better whole, just as there's always the possibility of a better potato, and I hope always the possibility of a better man. It seems to me that there's a whole frontier for science to discover harmless uses for itself and to foresee the consequences of its activities. Somebody wrote to me a while back about what might happen to horse technology if we started using some of the alloys and so on that were developed for space flight. I don't believe in space flight, but I would certainly be interested to see what that might turn up.
Horse technology?
Horse equipment. What could you do to get more efficient use out of a horse? I'm interested in horses myself. I don't care how far out or far back either it sounds. Horses are something we've got. I'd rather take a chance on something I've got than on something I haven't got myself, and that's where I put my eggs. The more we diversify, the better off we are. There's no reason why we should limit technology always to the most advanced and the most far out and the most sophisticated and glamorous and horse-powerful. We ought to have those things if they occur to us and we can produce them, but why should the new always replace the old? And why, having replaced the old with the new, should we invariably congratulate ourselves on having become richer? We haven't. There was a mentality that farmed in this country that was a rich, tough mentality. Those people are still going into the cities to take construction jobs, those small farmers, and they become foremen right quick. What are we going to do when we haven't got them anymore? Why should we simplify that mentality by teaching it how to reduce itself to some tiny little mechanical job? And why should we teach it to lie to itself then by saying that by demeaning itself in that way it's serving some great cause that's never been adequately defined to anybody?
Revert back. I think what you're talking about is to get more people back to the soil.
Let me tell you what I think about it. It's easier to grow a farmer than it is to train one. The idea that you can take a man 20 years old and college educated and make a farmer out of him with some kind of a course is preposterous. He pays the same expensive tuition that everybody pays who starts out into a thing like that on his own, and it's rough. I think I'm for that movement. I hope that those people who want to leave the city and farm will be able to do it, and I'm for their cause and on their side. But it's hard. But I do think there are things that can be done, and I named some of them this morning. Another thing that can be done is to have some kind of a willingness to consider possibilities. If what we call the modern world is inescapable, I think we're doomed. I'll be honest about it. I don't think that there's a chance. That is, a situation in which everybody is leisurely, well entertained and comfortable. You know what Thoreau said? Thoreau saw the railroad, and it gave him the shakes. Not very many people had the shakes at that time. Plenty of them got them now, because what we've got is just an extension of the railroad that went past Walden Pond. Thoreau said they think they're going to go on with this business of stocks and spades until everybody will ride. But when the whistle blows and the steam clears away, it will be found that a few are riding and the rest run over.